Erev Tov lekulam, a good Chanukah, a good Chodesh, and a good Erev Shabbos. Two friends from two families, wealthy families, successful families, their daughters reached the age of Shidduchim. They reached the age of marriageable age. And each one of the fathers sends a message to the Rosh HaYeshiva, the head of the Talmudic Academy in a city nearby, asking that the yeshiva send eligible bachelors for their very bright, one-of-a-kind daughters. A few days pass, and lo and behold, a young man shows up. A young man shows up, but it's only one. The families wait. They wait with a tremendous anticipation, but no other young man is forthcoming. So an argument breaks out between the two groups. Who this young man came to meet? And each family is arguing this young man must have come to meet my one-of-a-kind, special daughter. In the end, the aggravated mothers, they go to the Rav to get a ruling. And the Rav, using wisdom like Solomon, he says, easy, take a sword, cut the boy in half, and each family will get half the bacher. And one lady says, no, that's an awful idea. And one lady says, okay, let's do that. And the Rav says, the lady who had mercy on the boy is certainly not his shviger. He came to meet the other lady's daughter. Oh, this Shabbos, we actually are going to have a very special guest in Shul. A guest that comes around only once in 20 years. 10%. That's 10% of the years. That's all the years that we get to have this great honor of our guest from this Shabbos to come and visit us. Of course, we're talking about the Haftorah of Parsha Miketz, which is this week's Parsha. Usually, most years, the Parsha of Miketz falls out on Chanukah, and so the Haftorah is the Chanukah Haftorah, and the Miketz Haftorah gets overlooked. What's the story in the Miketz Haftorah, and how does it relate to the story in our Parsha, Parshas Miketz? Of course, they have to be related to each other. In the Haftorah, just like in the Parsha, we find a story of how a dream led to tremendous greatness. In the story, we have Yosef interpreting the dreams of Pharaoh and transforming his life from a lowly, embittered, he was not personally embittered, but his slavery and his servitude, his imprisonment was bitter. And then he became viceroy of Egypt because of the dreams that he interpreted. And in the Haftorah, we find the following. It's the first years of the reign, the kingship, of the young king Shlomo HaMelech. Shlomo HaMelech, at the beginning of his reign, was under tremendous pressure. He had a tremendous burden on his shoulders, and he felt it. For generations, the Jewish people struggled and suffered and warred and battled, and the tribes, even between themselves, couldn't get along. They weren't friendly with each other. They weren't a united front to defend themselves and the country. It was not until King David HaMelech, the greatest Jewish king ever, rose to power that the Jewish nation finally united, became powerful, became unified. And King David succeeded in securing Jerusalem as the capital and expanding the borders of the Holy Land, all the while maintaining peace. For the most part, it was a big struggle for him among the Jewish people. And Shlomo HaMelech, this young man, sat on his father's immense throne, and he was feeling the pressure. And so in the beginning of the third chapter of the book of Kings, Kings 1, Melachim Aleph, the Navi tells us that he falls asleep and he dreams a dream. And in his dream, Hashem says to him, ask me anything. I'll give it to you. And the young Shlomo says, please give your servant understanding to be able to hear, to be able to judge your nation, Israel, properly, and to know the difference between right and wrong. Hashem promised him anything he wanted. Shlomo HaMelech did not ask for strength, might, revenge against his enemies, money. He asked for wisdom, and Hashem promised him that he would fulfill his request, and Shlomo would be granted wisdom, the likes of which had not been seen until his day and would never again be seen thereafter. Thus, we have the wisest man of all, the wise King Shlomo. And soon after this gift, he has a chance to put it to use. What happens? Two ladies come to the court, the throne room of King Shlomo. The story between them is as follows. They are roommates, and they each had babies very close to each other. And they both, small room, they each had a bed, and they each slept on their beds respectively with their babies on the beds next to them. And a tragedy took place in their rooms. What happened was, one of the babies unfortunately experienced the tragedy called SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. One of the babies died. And the two ladies are now in the courtroom of Shlomo HaMelech because the one with the dead baby in her arms is arguing that her friend exchanged the babies, that really the dead baby was her friend's baby, and the friend must have exchanged babies during the night, stealing her live baby and leaving the dead baby in her bed. You can imagine the tension in that throne room. People are waiting for Shlomo HaMelech to rule, this young king. And he, of course, he lays down the incredible, eternally famous ruling: bring a sword, cut the baby in half, and let everybody have half of the baby. And of course, the room erupts. One of the mothers is screaming, "Don't do it, don't do it. I give in, let the other mother have the baby, just let him live." And the other mother is saying, "Go ahead, cut him up so nobody will be happy." Everybody immediately saw the truth of the story, the facts of the matter. Shlomo says the mother whose heart went out for the baby and was willing to give up her own happiness so that the baby should live, that's the mother of this child, and the other one is a imposter. Amazing. The brilliance, the wisdom of our King Shlomo. But really, that's the end of the optimistic part of the story, because as Jewish history goes, we Jews like to take every great event and turn it into a tragedy. Nope. What happens? The commentaries throughout the generations, they struggle to find understanding and meaning to this risky judgment of Shlomo HaMelech. How could he be so insensitive? How could he take such a great risk? In fact, in the Medrash, Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, if not for the mercy of this mother, that baby would have died. That baby would have been murdered. From there comes the saying, woe to the land whose king is young. First of all, how did he know it was going to work? And how does he know that the merciful mother was the true mother? Maybe in the heat of the argument, the other mother just said, the real mother could have said, yeah, just do that in her anger and in her frustration. While the other mother the other lady is not the baby's mother, the other lady could have just been a more merciful, compassionate person. How does he know that it's right? What if the true mother hadn't been so bold? These are simple ladies we're talking about. They live at the edge of town. They're not accustomed to standing in front of the king's throne arguing their case. Maybe the other mother would have been frozen in horror and in shock and not said a word. What would have been the end of the story there? The commentaries have no choice but to minimize the wisdom, to downplay the wisdom of King Solomon and say, in fact, the end of the story was God performed a miracle for King Solomon on that occasion. Because if not for God's intervention, this story could have turned out very, 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 very badly. However, the Torah tells us this story. And if the Torah tells us this story, and we're going to read it in Shul publicly this coming Shabbos with Hashem's help, what's the message? What's the take home? What are we supposed to learn from this? Rabbi Peles from Kfar Chabad shared with us the first meeting that he had with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And in that meeting, the Rebbe gave him the answer to this question. Shlomo HaMelech really addresses a key touchstone issue, I don't know if that's a word, of our lives. We live in a generation of consumerism. I want everything. I want this and I want that. I want my cake and I want to eat it too, and I also want to be slim. We want everything. We want to be spiritual, but we also want to have the luxuries of the modern American life. We want to be guaranteed the world to come, but we also want to be happy and free in the world that we occupy now. We want to be relaxed. We want to have peace and quiet, but we also want to work till we drop. We want to be paid regularly like employees, but we also want to own our own businesses. We want to be law-abiding citizens, but we also want to cut corners when it's convenient. We want to live in the Holy Land, but we also want to tour the United States. We want to be married, but we also want the tranquility of single life, the bachelor life. We want to raise children, but we also want to build our careers and work till midnight. We also want our children to carry on this attitude. For our children, we want everything. We want to raise them as good, God-fearing Jews, but we also want them to be successful, worldly people who know everything about everything. So here we find the tremendous argument, the tremendous tension between the two mothers. And the Rebbe said we're talking about the two yetzers, the two inclinations inside of the heart of a person. The yetzer hatov, the inclination to do the right thing, and the yetzer hara, the inclination to do the easy thing, or the comfortable thing, or the greedy thing, the selfish thing. They argue, whose child is this person? They both hold on to the soul of that person and they argue, this is my child. I should be allowed to raise this child in my world, according to my values. The Yetzer Hara comes and he says, how dare you claim this child is yours? The child has to be mine. He has to be modern. He has to be, but I'll compromise with you. You can have the Jewish child half the day, and I'll take the Jewish child the other half. Sounds like a fair deal. Sounds like a good idea. But here comes the other mother, the Yetzer HaTov, the inclination to do the right thing. And she takes a look at what she's about to give up. And she says these terrible words. No way. Don't do it. Better let the child live under your care, Yetzer Hara, than to be split in two. What? That's a shocking answer. That's a shocking response. But that's the fact. It's better that a child should have, right? That a child should not be torn between two perspectives. A child who's torn between what the parent says and what the parent does, what the parent teaches and what the parent is interested in, torn between what should be and what actually is, A child like this grows up unstable. Yeah. Doesn't belong to any camp, doesn't belong to any faction, is untethered, flailing around in the winds. He is raised on nothing. It really is the worst situation a parent could really put their child through. It's the worst way to raise a child. We remember the awful cry of Eliyahu Hanavi on Mount Carmel, when he says to the people who had just witnessed the duel of the century between Eliyahu Hanavi and the prophets of Baal, the great idol of that era. And Eliyahu had shamed them and embarrassed them, but the Jewish people were very attached to their idol Baal. And Eliyahu Hanavi demonstrated that Baal is nothing, and that the only power in the world is God himself. And after all of that, Eliyahu Hanavi says, now people, you've seen the might of God, now choose. If you want to serve Baal, go serve Baal. If you want to serve God, serve exclusively God. How long will you sit on the fence? How long will you jump on both sides? Like they say in Yiddish, how long can you tanz auf alle chasanas? Which is the strangest thing. You never expect a prophet to say that. You would think that Eliyahu Hanavi would say, now that you've seen the might of God, serve God exclusively. And those of you that want to serve Baal, shame on you. He doesn't. He says to the people, simply make a choice, make a determination. Be one thing. Like the mother said, like the Yetzer HaTov says to the Yetzer Hara, better the child should belong to you than it should be split between the two of us. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, from here, we learn clearly, the Torah is teaching us that it is better to serve idolatry than to sit on the fence, than to jump back and forth between the sides, than to not be clearly one thing or the other. Why? Because you have no foundation on which to grow if you're not anchored in one place. It's not that one day he is a servant of God and the next day he's an idolater. All the days of his life, he's nothing. He's not this and he's not that. This is the guy that wants to participate in everything and never wants to pay. He's not invested in anything. So then, right, from a certain aspect, it's better to be an idolater. Right? It's better to be the wrong thing than to not be anything at all. Why? Because if you are something, even if it is, God forbid, an idolater, at least one day a friend will bump into that person and say, maybe your perspective is not the right one. Maybe you could learn a different way and we could talk and you could grow, and slowly you could come closer to the truth. But you have no start. If a person has no starting point, there's no coming closer to anything. A person that lacks a spine is not going to move anywhere. He can't do anything seriously. The question is, however, this is the story of our lives. We are constantly caught between these two. We have the Yetzer HaTov, we have the Yetzer Hara. What are we supposed to do? The answer is two things. Number one, we have to lay an anchor. We have to drop our anchor somewhere. Maybe it's out of order. First of all, we have to make sure we have a Jewish education, ourselves and our children. We have to get an education for ourselves and our children from a place where right and wrong are clearly defined. Firstly. Secondly, you have to drop your anchor, as we said. You have to lay a foundation. Children have to be able to see in their parents that they live for something. One thing. It could be one thing. It could be one mitzvah, one custom, one hidur mitzvah, that it should be visible on a person that that's their thing. He knows, she knows, the children know. Yeah. For example, to go to a class once a week, one class, or if you're already doing that, add a class, whatever it is, or the classes that you already participate in, firm up your commitment so that you never miss, so that your children will know this about you. My father has this shiur and he never misses it, or you should know it about yourself. This thing is really important to me. This thing is chayk v'lo yavarsh. The Rebbe said your set times for learning Torah should be like Shabbos. There's no telephone, there's no computer, there's nothing. It's my time to learn. Or if it's mincha ma'ariv with a minyan, or if it's the contribution you give to the school or to the shul every year, something that never changes, that your kids can rely on, that you can depend on. This is my thing. Yeah, when the evening comes, and you're always leaving the house, you'll notice a blessing will emerge from there. The children will notice the clock, or the children will notice the sun is setting. They say, time to go to shul. You're late. What a blessing that is. There's something that they can depend on. They know what you stand for. You have ambitions. You have a plan. You're going somewhere. There's a story that came out of Israel. We get a lot of these classes from our friends, our fellow shluchim, who write beautiful classes and share them with the rest of us, and it's a great gift. And one of them, his name is Shneir Ashkenazi, tremendous Hebrew speaker, lecturer, and he shares the following story. He says he was giving a class between Mincha and Ma'ariv in his shul, and he finished his class, and there were still 5 minutes till Ma'ariv. It's the worst thing that could happen to you. Hey, you got dead air time. It's the worst thing. And this is not on radio, so you couldn't play bumper music. Anyway, he reminded himself of a story. And so in the last 5 minutes, while he was still putting on his gartel and getting ready for Ma'ariv, he shared the story. And afterwards, a man came over to him and says, I'm waiting for your story to come true. So what? He says, yeah, what you talked about. My family has been experiencing this, and I'm waiting for it to come true. What's the story? The story is like this. 2 years earlier, Rabbi Ashkenazi had gone to the grocery store on Friday afternoon, and, the weekend magazines in Israel, very nice, very Jewish content. And it was on the weekend, or in the week of the Siyum Hashas, when the worldwide study of Talmud was concluding the whole set of Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud. So the magazine covers was all about it, yeah? And so he picks up one, it was very interesting, and he's looking through it, and he sees a story about a whole family that was celebrating the Siyum Hashas together. What's the story? So the lady is writing, the lady of the house, that the family had gone through a terrible, terrible, dark time. One child was expelled from school. The other child was then embarrassed to go back to the same school where their sibling had been expelled from. The school then sent them a message that they're not accepting any more children from this family because it's too difficult and complicated. And so now you have 3 children at home with nowhere to go, no future, no light at the end of the tunnel. It was an awful time. The stress on the parents, you can even imagine. One time, the father comes home from shul and he says, you know what, my friends, my family, we have to have a family meeting because I want to try something. I really have no right to try this. I have no right to demand this of yourself, of all of you, the tremendous price that this is going to take. And I really have no interest in this myself. However, it's my hope that we'll try this, and who knows, maybe God will help us in the end. What did he see? I saw an announcement for a new class in Talmud study. Every day, they're doing the page of the day of Talmud, according to the order of the Daf Hayomi, and I want to do it. And maybe in the merit of that class, God will help. From that day on, the entire family became captured, held captive by this class. The lady of the house is writing, for 3 years, we never went on a vacation. For 3 years, we were late to every simcha. Because Abba has this class that he never misses. We couldn't go hang out with the friends. We couldn't go, nothing. Abba has this class that he never misses. It was hard work for the entire family. However, by the end of it, the family found that they were blessed. The children's lives were more meaningful. All as a result of this shir. That's the story I told Rabbi Ashkenazi, saying that's the story he had told 2 years earlier. And this guy said, I was there in shul when you told the story. And I thought to myself, you know what? My daughter is already marriageable age, and she's waiting for a shidduch, and it ain't happening. So maybe I'll do it too. I'll establish a learning schedule, and I'll never give up on my learning schedule. And this way, God will bless my daughter with a shidduch. Aha! But it hasn't happened. So Rabbi Ashkenazi, of course, he blessed the guy with all the depths of his heart that his daughter should find a shidduch, and said, keep hoping, don't lose the faith. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, the guy comes into the shir, to the class that he never misses. The great announcement, my daughter is a kala. my daughter is engaged, and we're going to get married, and the chasana will be on Tuesday in the sun. A great celebration for the whole community. The message is clear. At the end, if we can give a focal point to our own lives, we can survive the tug of war between the two worlds that we straddle. We can lend strength to the Yetzer HaTov that is pulling us in the right direction. But we have to, as the subject matter of the lecture is, we have to drop our anchor. We have to dig in somewhere, pick a thing, and make that yours. The direction of the rest of our lives, and the lives of our families, and the lives of our children, is highly improved by opening up our potential through an intense, strong commitment to the right thing, even in one detail of our lives. Let's close with one story that really is quite unbelievable, quite amazing. The Rebbe was once, it's many, many years ago, the Rebbe was once accepting the Yechidus, and into the room came a grandfather and a grandson into the Yechidus. Private meeting in honor of the bar mitzvah of that boy. For this boy, the boy had experienced tremendous spiritual decline in those weeks. And you can see the generation gap between the two of them. The grandfather with the beis and the beard, and the boy looked like an American boy. So the grandfather discussed with the Rebbe whatever he discussed. They were talking in Yiddish. And then the Rebbe turns to the boy and says, you a sports fan? In English. Who says, you a sports fan? He says, yeah. So what's your favorite sport? Baseball. Huh. You go to watch baseball games ever? In the big arenas, in the big stadiums? He said, of course. And the Rebbe said, which team wins usually? Of course, we all know the answer is the Yankees, which makes us very unhappy. But that's not what the boy said. The boy said, the team that plays harder generally wins. That's the moment that Rebbe was waiting for. He said to the boy like this: life is very much like a game of baseball. You stand in the middle, and all around you are players that are trying to steal the win from you. They're trying to pull you to their side to trip you up. Sometimes the Yetzer HaTov wins. Sometimes the Yetzer Hara wins. Many times a person feels confused and lost and doesn't know what to do. But you must always remember the message that you gave here today yourself. Whoever fights harder, whoever plays harder, whoever stays the course, he's going to win. That was the end of the Yechidus. That was the end of the meeting, and the boy went on his way. Years go by, and now the boy is 16 years old. And his class, they won a very, very precious prize, a reward, and that is that at the end of the week, they were going to go to New Orleans. He runs home to tell his parents about this tremendous gift. And to his surprise, the parents don't look happy about it. Why? Because the end of the week is Yom Kippur. And they have always been careful to observe Yom Kippur, of course, to go to shul. And the boy does not understand. Why is Yom Kippur more important than the trip? He wants to go. The argument went on and got stronger, and the parents, they argued. And but at the end of the day, the parents said, we have to leave it in your hands. Whatever you decide, you have to determine what you're going to do. If you decide to go, however, you're going to pay your own trip. Thursday comes, the night before they have to leave. He's sitting in the house of his friend, and he's watching on the TV a baseball game. The announcer is doing the play-by-play. It's a very tight game. And the announcer announces for all the world to hear. That's how it is in sports. Whoever plays harder wins. These words, they tore through the facade of confusion, the wall of confusion in this boy's mind, and they reminded him that of his words. You always remember that in life there's a battle between the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara. But whoever fights harder is going to win. The end of the story, obviously, is he didn't go on the trip. And the message for us is, of course, we are torn. We are the child that's cut in half between the two warring armies. But if we can drop an anchor on the side of good, that would be a huge boon and a huge assistance and a huge lighthouse in the dark to lead us on the right path and for us to set an example for our friends, our family, our children, and lead us to a life of happiness and spiritual delight. Thank you for joining. A good Shabbos and a good Hanukkah and a good Chodesh to everyone.